I would be very cautious about getting into composting, whether it's with worms or just regularly composting, because it is literally a wormhole that you're going to go into that you might not ever come out of.
You were just listening to John Craig, the master composter who runs the grassroots nonprofit We Compost, located inside the Farm and Food Lab at the Great Park, Irvine, California. This is Aaron Moskowitz, and you are listening to the Get in My Garden podcast, episode 75. In a moment, John will tell us how to get started in composting, some basic methods to try, and some of the experiments they are doing with worms and composting at the Farm and Food Lab. Then he shares the components of good composting and about his composting symbol that he has created for people to use while promoting and normalizing composting and compostable products. Later, we discuss the basics of how to deal with specific composting issues and 2 book recommendations for vermicomposting and understanding the soil food web. John will tell us how to find the right local worms that will thrive in your soil wherever you are located. Reach out to me anytime to connect at Get in My Garden on Instagram, or leave a note on the website getinmygarden.com, or you can stalk me on Facebook. Also, if you do go to the website, it's pretty basic. You can sign up for the newsletter easily there. I've barely sent anything out, but I will periodically send interesting articles and supplemental content through the emails.
So I guess the first question is, how do you start composting? It is not an exact science, but that being said, generally just composting itself is one aspect of someone's life, if they choose to partake in it, that they absolutely cannot fail. If they failed at everything else, marriage, jobs, whatever it is, composting, you just can't fail. You might not be doing it perfectly. You might not, be doing exactly the way it should be done, or it will happen, and it will happen.
You started with worms, you said, or that's your focus now. Do you recommend that people starting out try worms, or what would you recommend for them?
I would recommend whatever is the easiest way to do it. And a lot of people to start by digging a hole in the ground and putting their food waste in the ground. If they do something like that, I would recommend that they don't do it in the garden. Do it someplace else. And the reason is because all the microbes and fungi and bacteria will be going towards the food waste and away from your actual garden. And it'll take a while for that to break down and to actually make a difference in your garden. But so I'm going to contradict myself again. So I'm in Southern California.
Oh, you are? Okay.
One of the absolute easiest ways to compost is, and this is going to be in your garden, you're going to get a post hole digger, dig a 2-foot hole, and go to Lowe's and buy what's called a sonic tube.
Okay.
It is a cardboard cylindrical tube that's used for making concrete forms. 4 feet long, 8 inches in diameter. I recommend is you cut it in half and then drill 1-inch holes in it, bury it almost all the way into the ground, add the food scraps and add the worms. You might not have to add the worms. If you have a ton of worms in your garden, the worms will come in and eat the food and go out and fertilize your garden. If you don't have worms already, you'd want to add about a half pound of worms in there. And again, in theory, they're going to eat the food scraps and then go outside the in-ground worm bin and fertilize your garden. My farm is at the Farm and Food Lab inside the Great Park in Irvine.
Oh, cool.
And it's very, very cool. So we do experiments. And so one of the experiments is that we're doing right now is with this in-ground worm bin to see, do the worms go outside this bin? And it's going to be interesting because 4 inches down, it's almost clay sand. Very little organics at all, if there's any. So there's no reason for them to go out. And the reason this works in Southern California is I sell worms. And when I sell them, the last thing I want something to happen is for someone to get the worms, get all excited. They're going to, save the planet, improve the garden, all these things. All the worms die. So it's an investment of energy and time and, the enthusiasm. They're going to say, I'm done. I tried it. It didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And down in Southern Cal and other places in the South, it just gets so hot that it's hard to keep the worms alive sometimes. If you don't have them inside, or if your garage isn't air conditioned, or, you don't have a nice shady spot.
Uh-huh.
When it gets to be 105 and above, the worms are under stress and they either run away or start to die. So with it in the ground, it's going to be cooler. And even if it does get, warm in the bin itself, they can escape.
That's a really cool idea, just as a way to foster the life of the worms, and then hopefully they will move out.
Yeah, a lot of these composters you'll see cost, upwards of $150. So, this thing will cost you literally $10 plus another 20 for the worms. So, total investment of $30. You're improving your soil and saving the planet.
That's awesome. Well, so if someone doesn't want to do worms because maybe they're in the desert and it's too hot and they don't, I think that there are ways to, of course, keep them alive no matter what. But if they just were going to go regular composting, as you mentioned, like burying food, basic, on, in the corner of their yard, what can they expect? So
originally I was living in Ohio, and I moved out here about 5 years ago. In Ohio, it was fairly easy. Summer, winter, whatever it was, there's no problem getting the heat up. But in the southern states, the problem is, and I had a very difficult time when I first started, because all the food scraps, the oranges, lemons, whatever, they would all dehydrate before they had a chance to compost.
Yeah, that's like New Mexico.
Yeah. My favorite method is putting it in any sturdy metal wire frame, like hardwood cloth, make it into a circle about 3 feet in diameter, 3 to 4 feet in diameter, and just start piling in your food scraps.
Can you describe that again, like just so the visual is really clear for people?
You can take a piece of 3/4 inch hardware cloth, which is just wire mesh. You can use chicken wire, anything that has some sort of stability to it. You want it to be about 4 feet high, 3 to 4 feet high, and 3 to 4 feet in diameter.
Gotcha.
Put your food waste in there, and your browns and your greens, and when it fills up, what I do is, mine is made of sturdier metal. It's actually runway strips. I'm at an old airport, and they had extra, so.
Oh, cool.
Try to repurpose or reuse what's already available without having to buy anything. And so I was able to take this and bend it, and I take a metal rod, when it's full, the temperature starts, going down. I lift it up and put all the material back in while I'm turning it.
And what do you recommend, like if somebody's got a smaller operation, because if you've got a big corral that you're putting all your scraps in, I guess you're putting your yard waste in there as well. But for smaller operations,
a lot of people have grass. And one thing, grass is really good to heat up your compost pile. But the fact is, you absolutely do not want to be putting your grass into your compost bin. You want to be cutting it and letting it sit right on your lawn, because your grass is about 97, 96% water. Mm-hmm. And in that water is all those nutrients that you want to go right back into the soil. So within, a day or two, all the grass will be gone. It's best to just keep that stuff in your lawn.
Yeah.
But you're right. The operation now is it's good. What I'm describing is good for, like, if you have a lot of leaves, let's say, a lot of things you can compost, because usually just the food scraps is not going to fill that bin up. That's why compost with worms is so popular, I guess.
Because you can do really small amounts and keep an eye on how moist it is and all that.
Yeah. A pound of worms, in theory, can eat a half a pound of food a day. I've heard numbers up to 4 pounds a day. One of the major issues that people have is they hear that number and they overload the worm bin, and then it goes anaerobic and smelly, and all the worms die and attracts flies, and they give up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But going back to the regular composting, what I highly recommend is whatever is easiest. Even a small, I had a fire pit where we had that screen around it. Then the fire pit rusted out, but the screen was still good. And the screen was only, probably a foot tall by 2 feet wide. And I use that. If you put in, the right proportions of your greens and browns, it'll get nice and hot and it'll work.
There's a difference in that what comes out of a regular compost bin and a vermicompost bin. Can you describe like what the final product is that you'd be dealing with?
There are a lot of similarities, and there's a few differences. When you finish with your regular composting, it's all sifted and then it's cured for a few months, up to 6 months. You're going to have some really good stuff. You're looking for pure humus.
Yeah.
And when you reach that point, even in the scientific community, it's debatable. It's unrecognizable from what it was, what the original material was. You can't see any, veins from the old leaves or anything else. It's just completely unrecognizable. But it's still organic matter. The worm castings themselves, if it's absolutely pure worm castings, is just what it says, but it's poop. It's worm poop.
Uh-huh.
And as far as the benefits, they both have similar benefits. They're excellent for your soils, but according to Clive Edwards and a number of other individuals that are a lot smarter than me, increases the plant growth rate, it feeds your plants, it protects your plants from pests and diseases.
So it sounds like maybe the worm castings might be more microbially active. If
you do it right, it's going to have a plethora of microbes and fungi.
Uh-huh.
But yes, that's exactly true.
Well, I was looking at your website to sort of change the subject and to go back to kind of what you were originally saying you were working on with the symbol of the composting. Can you talk about that, where we're at and what it means and what your vision for that is?
Thank you for asking. So that's actually one of my main focuses. We Compost is a grassroots nonprofit. It had occurred to me that, there is no symbol for composting. If you're going to communicate or promote an idea or a thought or a product, there is no company out there, very few anyway, that don't have symbols. When you think of composting, the thought process is, anywhere from decaying leaves to, and incorrectly, rats and flies and smells.
Uh-huh.
What I did was I took the recycling symbol, absconded it, because Mother Nature is the ultimate recycler and she does it through composting. And I colorized the arrows blue, brown, and green. And I actually took the green arrow and I'm turning it into a green leaf. Colors are important because, number one, it tells you how to make good compost, what the elements are for making good compost is. Blue is you need air and water. Brown would be all your carbons. And green would be all your nitrogens. So if you have those 4 elements mixed in the correct order, correct amounts, you're going to have good compost. And then it has a second meaning that talks about the benefits. Some of the benefits of composting is, blue, it cleans the air and the water. When you spread compost out on a field or even in your garden or anywhere, it helps the plants pull in up to 75% more CO2 from the atmosphere. So, just using it, you're helping offset climate change. Compared
to very conventional landscaping and garden practices, I assume?
Sure. And then
where they're not building the soil at all.
Right. And it also helps bind heavy metals. So if you have, any contaminants in your soil or water, it will bind them to the compost and it won't go anywhere.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's just the blue. And then you get the browns, which, it helps build your soil, obviously. And the green it brings life.
And then there's got to be a certain amount of moisture and there's got to be oxygen, right?
Air. Yeah. So the rule of thumb for the amount of water, and a lot of what you compost already has water in it. We talked about grass having, almost 100%. Right. But when it's composting, you want to be able to squeeze it and get one drop of moisture out. So both when you compost with worms or regularly, thermophilically, you want to be like a wrung out sponge. With air, the worms you don't have to worry about. The worms will do all the aerating for you, but, again, you have one group of people that love to fluff. So you have the fluffers and non-fluffers, but
what does that mean? They like to constantly meddle with the worms' activities, or? Yeah.
So put new food in and they mix it all up, and it makes them happy.
So they're super hands-on with the worms.
If you take off your gloves, is an absolutely excellent thing, because there have been studies showing that actually getting your hands dirty, working in the soil, working in the compost, you'll get there's bacteria in the soil that will activate serotonins in your brain, producing endorphins, which make you happy. Just from personal experience, I love working in the garden and the compost, so it just makes me happy.
Yeah. Well, and so as far as the dryness goes, like when it's super dry and you're composting and everything's getting dehydrated, what do you recommend for that situation? Can you put them in bags or add water?
Once again, there's a couple different thoughts. So when you add water, I absolutely highly recommend collecting rainwater and using that, or well water and using that. Mm-hmm. The idea is to get as much microbes, whether it's thermophilic or with the worms, as much as possible. And when you have chlorine and chloramines in your water, you can't help but, they're meant to kill pathogens. And
right.
If you have enough good bacteria, you're not going to have any bad. So I try to stay away from city water.
That makes sense to me. As just collecting rainwater is possible even in a desert. So I mean, people have witnessed, I think almost everybody, just using tap water to, on house plants, how detrimental it can be.
It's amazing. It's like when you watch your garden and you're watering it every day and everything else, and all of a sudden it rains and you see amazing growth right off the bat. It's like, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm. What are you, with your symbol for compost, how are you using it and how are you promoting it? And what will the benefit be for everybody? I mean, is it just to bring more awareness to composting as a system?
So there are a number of ways that I'd like to see it being utilized. One way is we collect food scraps from the neighborhood. It's a drop-off. And on the outside of the trash can, we have that symbol to remind them it's not trash, it's, for composting.
Cool.
The problem also goes the fact that if you want to reproduce it, sometimes it can't be reproduced, be colorized at the same time. That's why the leaf made the green arrow, a green leaf. And if it can't be colorized, you can see the leaf and know that it's compost. Like t-shirts. So if a t-shirt's 100% cotton, they can have that composting symbol on the tag, so you don't just throw it away. It's just an easier way to promote composting and bring awareness to it.
That's great.
By the way, if any of your listeners, want to use it, please, they can go to we, as in you and I, compost, and then a number 2. So we compost 2 on Instagram or Facebook. You'll see the recycling symbol with the 3 colors in it. I haven't updated to use the green leaf. You'll get the idea. And if you want to, please take it and run with it. That is actually the mission of We Compost, is promote on-site composting, and anyone that wants to use it, I would love for them to do so.
When people are starting out, the odors and the smells, the problems that can happen, is it easy to fix these problems? Because that's what I think what would cause people to give up. You said the rats, the flies, that sort of thing. So
a number of things you can do to combat specific issues. And what I'm going to say can be transferred to both a worm bin or a regular compost bin. Well, you can cover with leaves, shredded paper, coffee grounds, help absorb the odors, or finished compost. So if you put a layer of finished compost on top, it'll absorb the odors and keep the flies out. Going back to thermophilic, if you turn it, the compost pile, the stuff that's in the center, if it's not getting air, you'll get an initial whiff of odors because it's going anaerobic, but then it'll dissipate very quickly and there won't be any odors.
So that can change quickly. The microbes that are, they'll die off and the beneficials will come back.
Absolutely. And if you get those, and if you get the the hot temperatures, I mean, the microbes are just doing all the work they possibly can to eat that stuff. Temperature up to about 150. Thermometers are extremely important to help you monitor what's going on. Highly recommend, if you're going to buy, one tool beside the pitchfork.
Yeah.
The gym's being closed. I mean, this is excellent exercise. It's absolutely good for you. Fresh air. I mean, the benefits it's a huge list. I recommend 2 books to everyone that is thinking about going into this, specifically for worms. And both these books will save you countless hours on YouTube and the internet, which has a ton of misinformation. So both these books are really good. One is written by the godmother of worm farming, may she rest in peace, Mary Applehoff. It's called Worms Eat My Garbage. And the second book is the book that I had to read to become a master composter. When you buy this, I'd buy it with a highlighter. It is easy to read, full of excellent information, fantastic pictures, and it'll teach you how to grow your soil. And it's called Teaming with Microbes by Jeff Lowenfeld.
Nice. Yeah, his books are so awesome, and I would say they've come up probably at least a handful of times, different recommendations from people who came on the podcast, so that's really good to hear. Yeah,
it's my Bible. If someone wants to compost with worms, and the problem is finding the worms, for me it's kind of redundant because I do it, but a simple Google search on Google Maps for, then type in worm farm. A number of times I've seen people try to, populate the worm bin with worms they get at Walmart or something in the fishing section. And it's just, there's too few worms, too expensive, and it's just easier and more productive to actually go someplace local and talk to the farmer and get his insights and get his worms and then support local businesses.
That's awesome. It seems like if you get your worms locally, they might be likely to have a higher chance of surviving in your soil conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And you go one step further, you'd like to find someone that's feeding the worms the same thing that you're going to be feeding them. It's already a traumatic experience being harvested, sorted, transported, and given a new home. And then on top of that, new food. Darwin thought these guys were extremely intelligent, and I'm not no one to doubt Darwin. So,
well, maybe that'll be your next thing is, lobbying for the worms. Give them a voice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Next week, we have an interview with an organization in the UK that has created a program to get children directly involved with gardening and insects, to turn them into ecosystem stewards via their books and music programs. Also in the next episode, I'll be reviewing a separate book for young adults, a graphic novel of the best-selling science memoir called Naturalist by Edward O. Wilson, which will be available on November 10th. Thanks for listening, and reach out to me anytime to connect at Get In My Garden on Instagram, or leave me a note on the website, getinmygarden.com. Share ideas for interviews and ask questions. Also, if you do go to the website, you can sign up for the newsletter easily there. I've barely sent anything, but will send interesting articles and supplemental content through these emails, as well as news about Get In My Garden and promos whenever possible.